Hey everyone, what is going on? What is going on? A good evening to you. Welcome to That Man Show. My name is Curtis Brooks. I am your host, executive coach, and men's life coach specializing in transformational leadership for men. Guys, we got yet another powerful show here today. I'm excited about this topic because it is yet another topic that's near and dear to my heart. That is leadership. And I think that we are all leaders. Yes, we're born to be leaders. Absolutely. I agree with that statement. And I don't think leadership is just for the elite or those who have money, but it is for anyone who is willing to take that journey because, in fact, it is a journey. So, once again, my name is Curtis Brooks. I am, as stated earlier, executive coach and men's life coach. And we are talking about. One second here. Give me 1 second here, guys. Kind of getting some stuff together here. We're talking about leadership, internal bleeding, leadership's internal bleeding, and how to fix it here. And I've got my trying to get, prepare. Got a few steps. Got to get ready here for LinkedIn on another monitor here. So bear with me, making sure we don't. There we go. All right. So. Absolutely. Okay, here we are. Awesome. So we are streaming to primarily three platforms. That's going to be LinkedIn is our first platform. That is our kind of our home. And I'm sharing the broadcast over on Facebook and YouTube. So you can check it out there. And I don't think I will be doing the Zoom thing today. I've got some things I need to work out, and I don't like being looking clumsy as I'm trying to fix it and things of that nature, especially on a live broadcast. I know that many of you have dedicated your time to come and show up, and so you definitely don't want to see me fumbling over trying to get Zoom to work properly. So I will get it figured out at some point real soon here. So in any event, we're talking about leadership's internal bleeding, how to fix it. We all have stories, and I'll start it that way. We all have stories, and those stories are horrific. Those stories are horrifying. Those stories are of heroic proportion. Those stories are just sad sometimes, and with those sad stories come just abuse. It comes just death, unfortunately, fatal situations, and it's absolutely unfortunate. But we all have stories, and understanding that we all have stories, there's going to be what I call internal bleeding for in the space of leadership. And so hence the topic here, we're talking about internal bleeding as it relates to leadership. And we're not necessarily talking about, if you've heard me discuss leadership in the past, we're not talking about, hopefully you guys can hear me. I forgot to turn my monitor on, but nevertheless, when we're talking about leadership, we're talking about leadership is for all. Again, as I stated earlier, leadership is not just for the individual who has who's went to the top schools or who has the finances or just comes from a particular background or family. That's not leadership. Leadership is absolutely available to all of us. And so with that being said, we all have stories. We all have stories, and we share those stories in a multitude of different ways. And what's interesting is that with each of the stories that we share, it tells us obviously a story about us. It tells us who we are, our character, and our resilience or emotional intelligence, or their lack of. So each of these stories absolutely tells something about us. But here's the thing: oftentimes, when these stories have no resolution, there is the internal bleeding for leadership. The bleeding that is within. Oftentimes we as people, we have a tendency. Awesome. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. Thank you for showing up. Thanks, David. Cause on the other side here. I like that last name, Cause. Interesting. But yeah, thank you, David, and for sure. I appreciate it, man. So that being said, we have a tendency to tell our stories in ways that benefit that benefit us a lot of times, and that's not always the truth. And because it's not always the truth, we end up having two stories. One that we tell the people or that we don't know, or tell those visitors, if you will, so to speak, that we tell our employees. If you're a leader in the space of a business owner, we have those stories. Again, those personal stories that we want to make sure that we are looking our best and just showing up in a best way that, again, that benefits us. But then on the flip side of it, we have the other story. And oftentimes, if you've heard me talk about this leadership thing, you've heard me talk about the mask. And so what happens is that we end up putting on a mask. We end up wearing this mask. And this mask in turn really hides the internal bleeding that's taking place within leadership. Now, this discussion is going to be, I believe, a powerful discussion, because what I'm doing right now, I'm talking about obviously internal bleeding, and I'm not in the medical profession at all, but I've done some research, and I know that internal bleeding can be a cause of a lot of different things, but primarily maybe a traumatic accident that may not have detected the internal bleeding that a person had, a punctured lung or something, or a stomach, or something that was punctured by a bone or something like that, or even a vessel that has been ruptured or something like that. So there's internal bleeding because this internal bleeding takes place, or the systems that the system called our body, the systems that make up our body, it is under pressure. And because it's under pressure, one of the symptoms for internal bleeding is low blood pressure. And that is because when that system exposes itself by way of a blood vessel or something that's been ruptured, again, and hence the internal bleeding, it causes the blood pressure to drop. So that's just one of the telltale signs. It could be also that a person is vomiting blood or something like that, again, from their stomach, because of the internal bleeding. And so what we're doing right now, we're taking this internal bleeding. Again, I'm not a medical professional at all, but we're taking this concept, this idea with internal bleeding, and we're comparing it to leadership. How there are those hidden wounds and the internal bleeding that takes place within leadership. And unfortunately, that bleeding, that those wounds that we have become subject to, and in most cases due to past historical events or things that have taken place in our personal lives, primarily taken place in our personal lives, and then they show up in our professional space. So we're going to, again, do a comparison as it relates to this internal bleeding, and also the leadership that bleeds internally from the hidden issue, or the hidden dysfunction, the wounds that we have accumulated over time through life, just life doing us sometimes, and we're not always on the end as doers sometimes. Sometimes we're on the end of life as the receiver sometimes, and we get wounded sometimes, and then oftentimes those wounds, we don't know that they're there. And it is an unfortunate situation, but we don't know that those wounds are there. And so a lot of times what happens is that we end up taking those wounds and bleeding on the other person. We end up dealing with those wounds, again, in most cases, we don't even know that they're there, but we end up dealing with those wounds in a way that it comes out as frustration. It comes out as anger with our spouse, with our colleagues, with our subordinates, with our children, or just overall our family members and people that we don't even know, or the aggression that maybe when we're driving, these internal wounds. And you don't have to necessarily be a leader at a particular business or a manager or a supervisor, but they show up at home as fathers, as mothers. These wounds show up for all of us. And obviously the title of this show is That Man Show, but we're not just talking about men in this instance, because leadership is for all of us. Leadership is available for all of us, for those who are willing to take this journey. And if you're willing to take this journey, I'm going to share something with you really quick here, what I wrote down before I kind of just dive further into our discussion. One of the things I wrote down is that Leadership, if you're not, someone or something else is. And so what that means is that if we're not willing to take, putting on the mask when not okay. Exactly right. Absolutely. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. Absolutely. Yeah, that mask is, the mask is interesting, man. We're going to dive more into that in just a bit here, but that mask is very, very interesting. And I think it is a hindrance in a lot of ways. It prevents us from showing up in our natural, and just in a authentic fashion. And I'm looking at, if you see me looking away, I'm looking at my other monitor over on LinkedIn. We've got David sharing his thoughts here. But yeah, that mask is very interesting, David. Absolutely. So, as we're diving, kind of lost my train of thought. I apologize. But as we're diving further into this, we're going to we're going to just uncover some things and hopefully get you right back on track in regards to how you're looking at leadership and how you're looking at not being afraid to look at the wounds that you may have acquired along the way. And the reality of it is, man, if you're worth your weight in salt as an individual, as a person, showing character and integrity, we know, that you and I are not going to get through this life with some kind of wound, some kind of internal bleeding, some kind of issue that we're having trouble or challenges getting through, or trying to topple, or trying to wrap our minds around. It's going to be very, very difficult, and it does not mean that it's impossible. But to understand that life comes with various challenges on all levels, and we're all challenged. It does not mean that just because you're rich or wealthy on some level, that you don't deal with issues. That is hogwash. It doesn't mean just because you're poor, you're dealing with more issues. That's hogwash too. The reality of it is that life hits all of us. Life happens to all of us. And we have to make a decision in this life that leadership is. I'm going to read that comment again. I have to. Leadership. If you're not, someone or something else is. So if you or I are not willing to take the helm, take the horse by the reins, and deal with the matters and deal with life as it comes, yes, it can be difficult, because in most cases we can say to ourselves, why did this happen to me? Or, even for the fact, I don't deserve this. Why do I deserve this? Why do these things happen to me? I can't definitively give you an answer why these things happen to you, but they happened, and now they're in our lap, and we have to deal with them, ladies and gentlemen. Because if we don't deal with those things, it is the beginning of the internal bleeding. Because after a while, there is that internal bleeding is any kind of medical issue. In most cases, they don't heal themselves. They don't heal themselves, and so that means that we have to tend to those things. We have to recognize that, hey, I'm bleeding. I've been cut. I had an accident. Let me look further into it. Or someone said something that offended me. Let me not. Be prepared to let me pause for a moment before I allow this individual to provoke me. But when we're dealing with the internal wounds or the bleeding from past situations that have taken place, and we're still talking about leadership, because leadership happens for all of us. You don't have to be a CEO. You don't have to be a manager, supervisor. You can be a parent. Leadership happens for all of us, and we are all dealing with something. And so if we're not willing to come to a place where we're looking at those wounds, intentional or unintentional. And sometimes the wounds happen or take place because of things that have been done to us, or the things that we've done to other people. So it is absolutely a two-way street. We commonly like to look at in life, a lot of us as people, or just people in general, a lot of times we like to play the victim role, but there are things that we've done to people. Let's face it. There are things that we have done to people as well. So We're going to clarify some things. We're going to open up some things. We're going to just, again, go in and do the surgery and fix these things that are causing us the pain. Fix those ruptured blood vessels and all the other things that could be wrong that's causing the internal bleeding. We're going to dive deep into this thing this evening. I'm super excited about this conversation, but here's what I want to do. You heard me mention about the stories. I said earlier about the stories, that we all have stories. And I think that it's important for us to understand that. And what happens that our stories, our stories end up being our belief systems. And oftentimes the belief systems that we have are without the principle that supports them. And it's interesting now, very interesting now, that in order for us to be changed by the stories that we tell, principles have to undergird them. And the interesting thing about principles, it's not racist. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. If you apply the principles, and here's the thing with principles often come in the way of our stories. That's why the stories are so important, because of the principle, of the lesson behind it, the lesson that undergirds the story, the lesson that undergirds what you and I have gone through. And so without the principle, without the lesson that's undergirding the very things that we've gone through, we can find ourselves telling a story on a cycle and not ever getting the lesson, or, being able to extract the lesson out from the story, or being able to apply the principle. And in a lot of cases, there might not even be principles related to our story. It's something that we've gone through. It's something that we've experienced. And that's the story that we tell ourselves. We're talking about leadership's internal bleeding and how to fix it. And so with that being said, I want to take you to, and I'm going to dive further into my notes, but I want to take you to something, some scriptures. And if this offends you, I'm not going to apologize if this offends you, but I want you to understand that even through the Bible, there are stories that we can garner principles from them. So I'm using and sharing these scriptures for the sake of the principles that I want to share with you. So I'll be reading out of the book of Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. And I'm going to read a few scriptures. And this is a story about when Jesus, absolutely, David, absolutely appreciate that, man. Absolutely. One person that gets it. Thank you, David. But nevertheless, absolutely. So this is the story when Jesus, after he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, he had stepped onto the scene. And so who meets him on the scene? The very first person where Jesus has come out of his situation. He is ready to just do damage to the kingdom of darkness, essentially. And guess who greets him? Satan, the devil, or the enemy of our soul. I'll put it that way for those who may not believe in the devil, but nevertheless, or believe there's forces that work contrary to the good that we do. So Jesus is on the scene and he's ready to just kind of do damage to the kingdom of darkness. And no one other than Satan meets him, and he begins to have a conversation with Jesus, knowing good and well what he's been born to do. He's aware of what he needs to do, or what Jesus has come to do. So it says, verse 1, Matthew chapter 4, verse 1, then Jesus was led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, I read that part. And then verse 3, it says, when the tempter came to him, he said, if thou be the Son of God, command these stones to be made bread. The first temptation. Okay, and I'm going to read that further. And Jesus responds, verse 4, but he answered and said, it is written, man should not live on bread alone, but every word that proceeded from the mouth of God, or out of the mouth of God. Verse 5, then the devil taketh him up into the holy city that setteth on a pinnacle of the temple. So he took him to a high place. And he says, the devil says, or Satan says unto him, he says, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. So during this time, just kind of a little bit background, there were people who were absolutely in a space where they were martyrs, and this is what they did, and they're worshiping of Jesus, or worshiping of the coming of Jesus, of the Son, and this is what they did as martyrs. So last and final scripture, verse 7. Jesus said, and Jesus says to him, it is written again, thou shalt not tempt thy Lord thy God. Verse 8. And again, the devil taketh him into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all these kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them. And he says unto Jesus, all these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Last verse. And then Jesus said unto him, get thee behind thee, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt not worship the Lord, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shall you serve. Okay. So the first one we want to talk about the discipline. And this is where Jesus was asked to turn the bread into stone. Okay, he came out of after fasting for 40 days, and obviously he was hungry, and so now Satan wants to ask him to show his power. Okay, and so now we're talking about discipline. All right, and so in my understanding of this thing here, we're talking about the very three things that every last human being gets caught up in: either the lack of discipline, where Jesus had come out of the wilderness and Satan had asked him to turn the bread into stone, lack of discipline. And in Jesus' case, he was disciplined to know the difference. Number two, he took him to a high place and told him to toss himself over the mountain, and that if he did that, the angels of God will be cast down to help him and prevent him from hitting his foot on the stone or killing himself, essentially. And we're talking about a zeal of unfounded information, of unmerited information. This is the second thing. So we've got discipline, the lack of discipline, and we got men being overzealous. All right, overzealous on unmerited information, unfounded information. All right, that's number two. Number three, we have power. We have the authority used in a inappropriate manner. And these are the three things that men and women and children, every living human being, will either become subject to. That is the lack of discipline. They will become subject to unfounded, unmerited information, having a zeal, being overzealous for that situation, not having the wherewithal, not knowing the character of a situation. It doesn't necessarily have to be about people, but knowing the character of a matter. Okay? Number three, walking in the proper authority. Circumspect of what you were called to do, what you were required to do, using that authority from a leadership perspective, from an emotional intelligence perspective. So we got the three things. We got lack of discipline. We've got lack of leadership, or lack of discipline, being overzealous for unfounded or unmerited information that we cannot prove, but due to again a zealousness, we will step out on the wrong information. Number three, we've got the power and authority that comes with leadership, and that in Jesus' case, he stood his ground and eventually told Satan, the devil, to get thee behind thee. And there are some decisions that we are absolutely going to make. And so I'm sharing this with you because in each of these situations, these stories, there are principles behind these stories. And could it be that the stories that we're telling ourselves, they lack the principle? They lack true foundation. And they become the stories or the mask that we wear. We may tell our colleagues, our family members one story. And in most cases, we've got different masks that we wear. We don't wear the same mask that we wear for our parents, we wear for our siblings. We wear different masks. But in most cases, the stories that we tell don't have the foundational support of principles. And so we end up repeating the cycles. So in our first talking point, as I stated earlier, we're comparing the leadership model, we're comparing the internal bleeding that's having to do with the medical field to leadership and its dysfunction that takes place, the internal bleeding, the internal wounds as well that takes place within leadership. And we oftentimes end up projecting our views and opinions and motives. The wrong motives end up being shown because of our wounds, because of the internal bleeding that's taken place, because our lack of attending to that hurt, our lack of acknowledging that we've been hurt, that we've been bruised, we've suffered a injury, a potential catastrophic injury, and we need for that injury to be tended to. And so, unfortunately, we end up leading our families out of this, from this same space as men and as women, as parents as well. We end up leading our organizations out of this same space here. So, the silent issues, when they go unaddressed, when we don't tend to those issues that we're dealing with, there is an absolutely a domino effect for the things that are taking place. And unfortunately, the anger, a lot of times as we as men are dealing with, it can come from, again, just being disappointed. It can come from just those unmet expectations. There's the word passive aggressive, which is kind of my favorite word, because not so much a favorite word, but it is kind of high up there because it's just very interesting. Because a lot of times if you know what the word passive aggressive is, hey, Sean Michael, thank you for joining, man, over on LinkedIn. Thank you, sir, for joining. So if we're looking and we understand the word passive aggressive, you essentially have a person who is feeling one way, who may be unsettled about a matter, and they're unwilling to say what's bothering them, to actually be an adult to say what's bothering them. And we may have all been there and on some level, but that's what happens when we are dealing with the internal bleeding as leaders. You've got people who are dealing with passive aggressive. You got people who are dealing with jealousy. And again, these matters show up in the way we lead people. These matters show up in our households, and the way we talk to our wives, or we talk to our spouse, the way we deal with our children. Different things having to do with insecurity. We're insecure about ourselves as a human being. We've got unsettled issues with our parents. We're still talking about internal bleeding that's relegated to leadership. Absolutely, David. David says over on LinkedIn, he says a band-aid on a wound that in fact it needs surgery. Absolutely, absolutely, it needs to be tended to. It needs to be tended to by a professional, and it does not mean that you are that we are crazy, or we're just, we can absolutely exhibit those behaviors that again, just being emotionally unsettled. Absolutely, we can exhibit those behaviors, and when these things are happening, don't get me wrong. Now, there's nothing wrong with being angry, because we all have been that in that place. But when you are angry perpetually, an individual's angry perpetually over and over, and it's just these very small things that they're flying off the handle about. There, in fact, my friend, are some deeper issues that need to be rectified, that need to be taken care of. And when they're not taken care of, I call it internal bleeding. Okay, I call it internal bleeding when these matters are not taken care of, because what happens, in fact, is that you cannot lead. We cannot lead lead our teams. We cannot even lead our families. And we oftentimes we like to think that our leadership that takes place, or as fathers and even as mothers, we like to think that our leadership that takes place and the things that we do at home are so different or separate, or just miles apart one from the other. That is the farthest from the truth. Because if you can lead a family, if you can lead your family in the multiple or different attitudes that we deal with our daughters, our babies, our wives as husbands, and the wives as dealing with their husbands, if we can deal with these things at home, we can absolutely deal with these matters that take place in the workplace. So the word leadership is absolutely expansive. It's not just relegated to leading an organization, or be it manager or a supervisor, or having subordinates, but it's allowing yourself to take your position in your household first and foremost. I believe that as leaders, as leaders, as even as business owners, if you will, you may not necessarily have an actual business, but our first place of business is our home. That's where we show up as leaders, in our homes. And for the lack thereof, or when you have when individuals have an issue with leadership, look at how you may have been led at home. There are people who just don't like leadership. But the reality of it is that there needs to be systems in place. That's just the way it is. There needs to be systems in place. And when these systems are not in place, being led by someone who has gone through certain things, who has traveled, who has taken certain journeys, when these things are not in place, things can be absolutely catastrophic. One of my favorite LinkedIn people, Henry, he talks about entropy, and it is a big word, that life in itself, the things that we're dealing with in life, they're not going to fix themselves, and they're going to get perpetually worse. So there absolutely does take some kind of intervention. So know that when we don't address these things, as far as the visible cues that show up in life, in regards to perhaps a broken relationship, perhaps your spouse that says something to you and you didn't receive what they said. And it's interesting, and again, from my own files, so to speak, it's interesting. A lot of times, the people who are close to us will, in fact, tell us the truth, and then sometimes the way they say it may not necessarily be the way we want to receive it, especially in heated arguments or heated discussions on some level. A lot of times these heated discussions, they come with people telling the truth. And sometimes these are cues or visible cues. We may not like how the cues show up, but they're visible cues letting us know that we need to fix something. They're visible cues letting us know that something is wrong, especially when an individual's been in one relationship after the other, and that can mean jobs as well. one job after another, one job after another, and you're going in that job or you're working that job and you're having to have conflict with people all the time. If not all the time, maybe all the time is not the proper word, but that you're easily offended. That means that there's a bigger issue. That means that there's a bigger issue, or if there's something that you just don't want to hear. Sometimes we have to hear these things for the sake of our healing, for the sake of our own sanity, for the sake of moving that stone that prevents us from living our best lives, from being the best version of ourselves. We need to hear the truth, ladies and gentlemen. And sometimes we just don't like the messenger. Let's just face it. We don't like the messenger. You know, we don't like the messenger. We have an issue with the messenger. His hair is too long. He doesn't have a degree. He doesn't come from money. All of this just nonsense. All of this nonsense that really prevents us from, as people, from taking our rightful places in life, within our households, within our relationship. Because as men, let's face it, I'm going to put on my man hat for a moment. But as men, there are things that we just should not be allowing. But the reality of it is, in our relationships, there's certain things that we should not be allowing. I understand that there are certain that, to each his own in our respective relationships. And I'm not trying to be lord over anyone else's relationship except my own. But the point I'm making is that there are certain things that we as men, we have dropped the ball. We have allowed the gate to become open and be kicked wide open. And there are things that we should not allow. And that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. I'll just put a pin in that. Sean over on LinkedIn says, if you see me looking away, I'm looking at my other monitor here. Sean over on LinkedIn says, if you don't grow and lead yourself, you'll just carry the crap to the next situation. Absolutely, Sean. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's essentially what I've been discussing or sharing with you, is that you're going to take that same situation to the next relationship and potentially be in a space where you're blaming the other person, where it's always the other person. It's always an excuse for why your relationship didn't last. Always an excuse for why the person didn't like you. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes we just have to submit. I know oftentimes we hear that with men saying, "Oh, the wives need to submit." But even as men too, guys, let's just face it. There, our egos, our pride as men, and just, I know how it should be done, and things of that nature. I've dealt with those things as well too. I'm not out the woods either. I am absolutely not out the woods. These things have a tendency to try to creep up on me as well. But there's a need to pause sometimes. There's a need to pause in life sometimes. Just take a deep breath and pause. Because you may not be right. Or there may be another perspective on which you can look at it from. A different perspective. Something that you had not thought about before. And come into just a new release in life, because oftentimes I think we think that something, this, even in the space of spirituality, we think that something is just so miraculous something so miraculous is going to happen. And Bob Marley says in one of his songs that there's no great God that's going to come from the sky. But it's the information that's going to set us free. It's the information that's going to set us free. And so the information that we need to receive, or that we need to unlock the door to that next place in our life, it may not come from a person who's got 6 degrees, more degrees than a thermometer. It may come from your child. It may come from just something some kind of act that you've seen on Facebook or social media. And we have to prepare ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. You're absolutely missing it out on life if you've got if you have allowed life to deal you the cards that your blessing, your opportunity is going to come from one location, this one space. Because I've got my degree, I'm this, or he knows this much and she knows as much. You're absolutely fooling yourself, ladies and gentlemen. You are just being deceived. And I'll put it that way. Because whether a person believes in God or not, there's some things, some truths that I've watched my 2-year-old in a way that she responds, in the way that she goes about her day. I've watched her and drawn principles of life from. A 2-year-old has no degree, may not have any real aspirations at right now. But the principles in life that we need to come out of our situations are right in front of us, ladies and gentlemen. They're absolutely right in front of us. When we have to determine that the person or the messenger who brings the principles, a messenger with the story, we have to determine to come to a greater understanding. We have to look within ourselves on a much deeper level and know that the truth that God will give us can come from a 2-year-old, can come from a person without a degree, can come from a person who's on the street, who has no home, who feels rejected. It can absolutely come from any of us. And when we turn ourselves off from the many possibilities that life gives to us on how to unlock the door, the combinations are right in front of us, ladies and gentlemen. The combination is right in front of us. And when we turn ourselves off because of skin color, because of just a multitude of different things, I don't like his hair. I don't like his beard. I don't like his color of his shirt. I don't like this. I don't like this. When we turn ourselves off to the delivery of the message, when we turn ourselves off to the messenger on the vessel who's being used at that moment, because any of us can be used at that moment. And when we turn ourselves off, disconnect ourselves, because of the internal bleeding, we do ourselves a huge disservice. One of the other symptoms of internal bleeding is what we call, I like to say, a communication breakdown. When there's internal bleeding, again, we're relating this internal bleeding to actual leadership, the dysfunction or the internal wounds that we may have dealt with, or we may be dealing with, the internal bleeding, the unresolved issues that we may have as leaders. So that is the correlation between internal bleeding and actual leadership. So I call this the communication breakdown as I'm looking at my notes here. When we're dealing with this internal bleeding or the internal wounds, there's in most cases, a communication breakdown. I want to read Sean's comment over here. Okay, Sean here, he's got a couple of comments here, guys. So again, you see me looking away here. I'm looking at my other monitor to read Sean's comments here. Guys, just really quick, I want to thank you for your engagement. I really appreciate it here. It really kind of helps to kind of provoke me and light a fire in me as well. So I definitely thank you for your comments and engagement over here. So Sean says, yes, the Bible says wives should submit, but there's much more there, including submit to one another and love your wife as Christ loved the church. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, there's a lot more to that, Sean. Absolutely. Yeah, I was just kind of just touching bases on that just a tad there, but yeah, that's a whole nother series of live streams there for sure, man. Absolutely. And Sean goes on to say over here on LinkedIn, he says, I've learned more from my 7-year-old than university professors. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I think life has so many lessons that we can draw from, and not so much just the lessons themselves, but the principles from those lessons. And when we miss those lessons, hey Wayne, thank you, brother, for joining, man. Appreciate that. The internal bleeding eventually spills. Absolutely, Wayne. Thank you for that comment. Absolutely, over into external world for sure. Absolutely, yeah. We were just discussing it for sure, man. Absolutely, that internal bleeding is again, we're still talking about leadership. We're not actually talking about actual bleeding. We're talking figuratively speaking, not literal, but yes, that internal bleeding will absolutely spill. Eventually, it'll become, and in most cases, we know that there's, let's just face it. In most cases, we know that we're bleeding. We know that we've been wounded emotionally or from a past relationship or some sort. We know that we've been wounded. We feel it, and in most cases, it shows up consistently. Those same wounds a lot of times show up consistently from one relationship to the other. And it does not mean that when I say relationship, I'm not necessarily speaking of an intimate relationship with your spouse or your partner, but I'm speaking of just relationships in general, relationships in life. And so those internal wounds, when we're not tending to those things, they absolutely will show up on how we deal with our children, how we deal with our spouse, how we deal with our subordinates, how we deal with other colleagues in the workspace and our profession in the professional arena as well. So absolutely well said, Brother Wayne. Thank you, sir. Sean says, have a great night. You got to go prep for dinner. All right, man. Enjoy your dinner. Thank you, Sean, for your wonderful comments, man. Thank you over there on LinkedIn. So we've been talking about the communication breakdown. So as I stated earlier, one of the things with the communication breakdown and is that we can display just being unsettled in our thinking. We can become anxious. Anxiety shows up. And again, as Wayne stated over here on LinkedIn, is that due to what we're dealing with, guess what happens? The consequences, or those things that follow suit with that communication breakdown is anger. And we know, I shared a conversation I think a couple of weeks ago. We know that oftentimes with anger is anger is the expression in most cases, and is the expression of a bigger issue in most cases. So anger is how we express ourselves, but it's not the thing. If that makes sense. So there's usually a unresolved matter or something under, again, that internal bleeding, something that's taking place on the inside that we have not shared. Passive aggressive, again, that passive aggression. It can also take place in the communication breakdown because we're unwilling to state what the matter is. We're being passive aggressive, meaning that we'll say passively, speak out loud with words passively, but yet there's an aggression going on the inside. So that passive aggression shows up in a way of what we call it, being cynical, snide remarks, being very short with your spouse, your significant other, colleagues, employees, or subordinates, whatever the case might be. It shows up in a way that we're being short with people. Again, that is the communication breakdown. So it is important that as we're trying to heal ourselves as we're trying to heal ourselves, it's important to know that we've got to be prepared to state the matter and seek professional help if need be. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I am a executive coach, men's life coach. So I want to make sure I'm plugging myself here because oftentimes I forget to just kind of share this information with you. So we'll definitely get back into the discussion here as well. So as I stated earlier, this is my information on the screen here. You can check out my link there. Set up a time to talk with me. It's a free 30-minute discussion, more so a strategy session that's going to be on the screen there, bit.ly, free 30-minute coaching. Once more, bit.ly, free 30-minute coaching. Check me out there. So as I mentioned earlier, the passive aggression is definitely a piece of it. What else we got going on here? We've got the silent treatment. I mentioned this in one of my other conversations that I had. Silent treatment is absolutely on part of that program when there's a communication breakdown. Being frustrated. Again, this is definitely not an exhaustive list. There's a lot more to this communication breakdown, because when we break down in communication or we fail to communicate effectively, hence communication breakdown, we leave so many things left to we leave so many things left to be possibly considered or assumed. Maybe assumed is a better word. We leave so many things to be assumed. There's a huge gap when we're not communicating, unfortunately. So communication breakdown is a huge piece. Number 3, in the workplace, we're talking about leadership. We're talking about leadership's internal bleeding. So how does this affect us in the workplace? We've got our employees who don't show up because they are dealing with those internal wounds. We've got our employees, we ourselves, we can be easily offended by people and their actions. Again, just small, minor things. And in most cases, there's usually something bigger on the other end of that. But as people often do, we'll take that minor thing and say, oh, I don't like the way he does this or the way she does this. And in actuality, it's something much bigger than that. It's a small thing that we can find ourselves blowing up. And there are times where we as people, we can find ourselves blowing up at small things. And so much so to the point where that our response to that small thing, that small matter that had taken place that supposedly had offended us, or at least we feel offended by that small thing, and we can find ourselves flying completely off the hinge about a small thing. That tells you that something else is going on, obviously. And our response to that small thing or being offended by that small issue is the response does not fit the action. The response does not fit a person brings a knife and a gun, that kind of thing. That the response, that the person's response to the minor offense, and when they're flying off the handle, it doesn't fit. So it tells me that there's something greater, something bigger happening. Hey, Lenora, thanks for joining us. This is my wife. Thank you, babe. Oh, here we go. Okay, Lenora says, when there is communication breakdown that isn't repaired, individuals are left to develop their own narratives. Absolutely. They're left to develop their own narratives. And I just kind of actually just said that moments ago in regards to we're left to assume, we're left to build our own story, as Lenora said, to create a story. We really truly are. We're left to create a story that in most cases that's not true, and that's reality. That's not true. We're left to build. We're left to put together our own story, and to stand on that story. In a lot of times, to stand on that story. So it is important that to know that, again, this is part of the communication breakdown, part of the internal bleeding that is taking place, part of the internal wounds that we have received in life throughout the course of just relationships, our upbringing, and the to know that that these wounds and this internal bleeding, it does not necessarily come just from the from a past lover or a past marriage and things of that nature. These internal wounds come from our upbringing. That's just the way it is, and they can show up in different areas. And I know for me, a lot of times, on a personal note, a lot of times when I'm trying to process something, I may not get it that very moment. And I do this a lot of times, not all the time, but quite a bit, where I may not process it. I'm trying to wrap my mind around something, and I may not understand it at that moment. It doesn't make sense to me at that moment. And I find myself trying to pull out words and trying to put it together, trying to build something and to understand it. But oftentimes I find myself that if I'm having to just sit with it for a moment, to sit with it and come back to that matter, I can make sense of it and put it in the right perspective, or say to my wife, oh, this is what you were saying. And then we can ensue or continue the conversation, because a lot of times when there are those places where we find ourselves just stuck trying to understand the other person, there absolutely is cause for us to just pause for a moment. Absolutely. And that's what I find myself having to do a lot of times, pause, because as it, just how it is, how it is for us as men, especially as leaders in our household. We do. Sean had said something earlier in regards to just the scriptures, husband love your wives as Christ loved the church. This is what Sean had stated over on LinkedIn. And there is a duty and a responsibility more so for us as men that we have in our wives. And so that we're absolutely having to be the ones that are more understanding. And it's not to say that our spouse or significant other can't be understanding, but as men, a lot of times we're having to wear that hat and to find ourselves being stretched over and over. And it can be difficult, because sometimes, I can be honest with you, sometimes I don't feel like being stretched, because I was just stretched out from the last situation, and just being honest with you, it can be difficult having to wear this hat, having to be in this space. But nevertheless, this is what we're called to do as men. And we have to show up in that regard, that we are protectors. We're absolutely protectors. So we talked about the communication breakdown. And there's a reason that these wounds, open wounds or internal wounds, internal bleeding, there's a reason why these things go untreated. As I stated earlier, most of us, in most cases, we know that we've been damaged by either a past relationship, or we grew up a certain way in our household. Mom was a yeller, dad was a yeller, or whatever the case might be. Mom wasn't there, dad wasn't there. So it can be hard for us to take our rightful positions in something that we just may not be aware of or know how to, because we didn't see mom in his position. We didn't see dad in his position, or our fathers weren't there. So it can be absolutely very difficult to garner these new roles or positions and we don't have a template. I talked about this, I think, last week or one of the previous shows talked about that as well. Not having a template on how we're going to execute something. So we show up the best way that we know how to on most levels. We show up untrained. We show up lacking the understanding, lacking the confidence. We show up insecure, even in our marriages. Let's just face it. That's just the reality. Women too now may not have had the example of a wife. What does a wife look like? What does a wife do? For us as fathers, what does a father do? How does a father show up? And so naturally, consequently, we show up in a way that we have learned how to show up, even if we're piecing it together. And as Lenora stated earlier, even if we're building our own narrative, our own story out of these different experiences. So how are you showing up? And we have to be willing to admit, and I think this is one of the wonderful things about God, is that I think that when a man is willing to admit, to say, you know what, I don't know, or I've been wounded, I've been hurt by someone or something. When we're prepared to admit that, prepared to be in that place, that vulnerable state, if you will, being vulnerable. It doesn't mean that you're bearing your soul to everyone. That's not what I'm saying. But you can be honest with yourself in that private moment. I talk to myself all the time. I call it talking to the Lord all the time. Because sometimes we need to hear ourselves being vulnerable. It may not necessarily be for your wife, your spouse, your significant other. Sometimes it's the things that we need to hear, that we need to be able to be prepared to confess to ourselves, and if need be, one unto the other. Share those things with others so that we can get into that healthy space, that healing space. Wow, where has the time gone? Wow, my goodness. It's actually over an hour. But nevertheless, so we've been talking about the wounds going untreated. The wounds going untreated. And essentially the root cause of those things, of those wounds, or the internal bleeding going untreated. And I'll say again, in most cases, we know where the wounds are. And I'll give you some grace, give myself some grace, because the reality of it is that some of the major wounds that keep showing up, obviously we know those things that show up in our relationships, that prevent us from showing up or being available in relationships, because those things happen to show up frequently. I like to call it in relationships, there's a 3-month period. And there's that 3-month period that in relationships that when we're not where we're on our best behavior, I'll put it that way. And then after those 3 months, it just seems like the floodgate has been opened. It seems like our stuff shows up again because we failed to tend to it in the previous relationship. And there are the off seasons that we have in life. We all have them. And the off seasons are the perfect time for us to be honest with ourselves. Because sometimes, not all times, but sometimes it can be difficult to be honest with ourselves in the midst of our significant other. While you're in it, I'll put it that way. It can be difficult being honest with ourselves because we can find ourselves not being able to be vulnerable or find it difficult to be vulnerable or appearing naked before our significant other. And I'm speaking figuratively speaking, but appearing naked before our spouse, our significant other, our partner. It can be difficult because in some cases, we may not have seen that vulnerable part of ourselves as well. And because we have not seen it, we can find those people that we are in a relationship with. We can find those employees that we have built a relationship with on a job as a leader, or our children. We can find our children pulling on those things, pulling almost seeming like pulling on the worst part of us, because those things are undealt with. The internal bleeding that shows up, they're undealt with matters. The undealt with pain, the wounds that we have become subject to because of life. Life happens for all of us. And the thing about it, you don't have to be ashamed. But oftentimes, that's exactly what we are. We are ashamed. And this shame prevents us from getting to the root cause of the wound or the internal bleeding. And so consequently, we end up telling ourselves one story, telling ourselves or multiple stories, and yet a different story for those who don't know us. So it's important for us to get to the root cause of those matters related to the internal wounds, the internal bleeding. As Wayne said earlier, that internal bleeding or wounds, it would absolutely become an external matter. Stress a lot of times shows up in a way where, and at least for me, I'm going to just be very frank with you, stress can show up in where our body gets almost like abrasions. Not like you cut yourself, but you can get, for the things that are taking place internally, you can get little nodules or bumps in your skin because of the stress. So it's important for us to deal with the root causes. Having a healthier diet. Some I've been fasting for the probably last several days. Some parts of it, not necessarily all day, but some good parts of the day, good 10, 12 hours I've been fasting, and I might eat later on or something like that. So I've been being intentional about fasting for blocks of time. And that's important that we get those things that are placed in the food that hamper us from showing up as the best versions of ourselves. So we're talking about getting to the root cause of those wounds. Getting to the root cause of those wounds. Getting to the root cause of those wounds might mean, in some cases, it might mean that you're forgiving yourself. You're forgiving yourself. You're forgiving others. We're talking about getting to the root cause of those hidden wounds that are untreated, the internal bleeding that takes place, that eventually, when left untreated, it will absolutely spill over onto our personal matters, professional matters. They become external issues. It becomes external bleeding, as Brother Wayne has stated. Absolutely. Yeah, Wayne here says on LinkedIn, he says that we've got to heal so that we can lead whole. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Leading as a whole person it can be very difficult. And I think that oftentimes in life we are we are we're calling on people because I think the to the level of people that are unhealed, from a financial perspective, we call those people who have all the money. Essentially, that small group of people who have all the money, we call them the one percenters. And I often like to say that there are one percenter of healers because not everyone has been healed, and it doesn't mean that other people, obviously other people can't heal, but I do believe there's a small group of people who have been healed. And yeah, absolutely. David says over on LinkedIn, he says forgiveness and acceptance of fault, step one. Yeah, 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 absolutely. Matter of fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think AA kind of uses that same concept, in regards to just getting through their program or the different steps in their program, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, forgiveness and acceptance, and I think that's also we like to call accountability, and accountability can be huge for a lot of us. Accountability is a big piece. So. As I stated earlier, we want to make sure that we're leading, or at least as Wayne stated, we want to make sure that we're leading whole. It's very difficult to lead whole if you have not healed. And if you have not healed, in most cases, you have to look at the motivation. There's a spirit behind leadership, ladies and gentlemen. There's a spirit behind leadership. I absolutely believe that leadership is divine. Leadership is absolutely divine because you've got to go through some stuff in order to have a seat at that table called leadership. When you're leading with integrity, when you're leading with when you're not leading with an ulterior motive, when you're leading and not trying to make people subject to you or to myself, not trying to place your thumb on people. That's an entirely different table. It takes work. You have to be invited to sit at that table. Yeah, you got to be invited to sit at that table because you have to work on thyself. And I think oftentimes when the opposite is true, when we have not done the work ourselves, when we are showing up, as Wayne said, less than whole, a partial leader or a wounded leader, due to the internal wounds, and we're presenting ourselves one way, we're telling one story, and yet we're telling ourselves one story, and yet we present ourselves, and yet we present yet a different story to other people. When you're dealing with that kind of a leader, he's no different from the rest of the leaders. And this is why I like to say, and I hope some of you don't get offended, but I think that some people who have paid tens and thousands of dollars for leadership courses, you probably need to get your money back. Because one thing that I think that the true leadership is healing on the inside. And if we're not ready to lead ourselves through the muck and the briar and all the stuff that's placed upon us in life, our upbringing, be it your father not there, or their mother was a yeller, or an abusive in some way, or whatever the case might be, as a child you dealt with emotional and mental abuse, and just the layers of different things that we have potentially could have dealt with. When we have not come through that, we're not going to come through that unscathed, but when we have not dealt with the matters concerning those things and find ourselves spilling onto other people, you're not ready to lead. And you're essentially leading out of the textbook style. Because I believe leadership is divine. Leadership has a divine purpose. And one of the bigger purposes or part of the leadership is authenticity. Being able to be vulnerable, being able to lead with integrity, as you heard me read the scriptures to you earlier. Being Jesus, being tempted to 3 times. Not about the scriptures or whether you like Jesus or you don't. It's not the point. The point of it is that unless the stories that we tell ourselves are undergirded with principles, we don't change. They're just another story, another experience. The story can be absolutely entertaining. It can be thought-provoking. As stated earlier, it can be heroic. It can be scary. It can be sad. It can be told in all kinds of different ways. You can be an excellent storyteller. But unless the story is undergirded with principles, it is principles that are the guiding factor. They are the principles of the stories that we are perhaps not telling with ourselves, or the principles are missing. I'll put it that way. There are the principles of these stories that are missing. And in fact, it ends up keeping us in the dark. So that might be a reason why it still seems so dark. Because the principle, the stories that we're telling are not undergirded by principles. As I stated earlier, principles are no respect of person. The principles don't care whether you're black, you got long hair, whether your head is bald, or it doesn't matter. The principle doesn't care if you're a woman, if you're a child, if you apply the principles. And oftentimes these principles are told in stories. That's the reason why the stories are so important. Because if you miss the story, because you don't like the person or whatever hang up you might have because of the internal bleeding that you may be dealing with, or internal wound, or that offensive spirit, or being offended easily. If you miss the story, you may miss the principle. And oftentimes the stories are told in many, many different ways. But the principle always remains. So we're talking about getting to the root cause of those leadership wounds, the internal bleeding that has taken place. How do we overcome those situations? We decide to face the fear. Know that there's going to be, we're going to be uncomfortable. Know that we're going to be uncomfortable. In the midst of healing, we're going to be uncomfortable. The ripple effect, I kind of talked about this earlier, the ripple effect, the things that take place when we don't deal with the hidden wounds, the leadership wounds, the internal bleeding that takes place, the dysfunction that takes place within us internally, the unsettled behaviors and just the unsettled spirit or ideas or our belief systems when they're unsettled, or when we feel like our belief systems have been challenged by a colleague, or our belief systems have been challenged by our children. Our belief system has been challenged by our spouse. The rippling effect can be catastrophic. The rippling effect can be damage to a relationship or dissolving a relationship, to include our marriage, dissolving of a business. Okay, kind of touch bases on that already, so I don't want to kind of be redundant there. So let's look at some fixes for this. Okay, let's look at some fixes for this. So as a business leader, CEO, a supervisor, a parent, you might want to be prepared to write some things down that you need to deal with. This is well before an organization needs to talk about policies. Sometimes the things that we need to deal with, it needs to come from us first. We need to be prepared to have those conversations in private first and be honest with ourselves. And then we can start putting the policies in place. My phone, I got to change the screen goes dark here really quick here, so I've got to change the setting on that. So we've got to be prepared to deal with the matter that is unsettled within our own selves first. And then at some point talk about writing policies or changing the way how other colleagues or employees deal with things. And as leaders, I believe the way we lead, it comes from the head first. And if we have an unresolved matters, if we have unresolved personal matters, rest assured those personal matters are showing up on the job as well. And we can't, in most cases, we're not able to identify them. It's hard for us to see our stuff at times when we are dealing with internal bleeding or the internal wounds that we receive as leaders. It's hard for us to see ourselves. And if it's hard for us to see ourselves, guess what happens? Our employees, our children show up in the same way, and we dismiss it because we can't see ourselves in it. If we can see ourselves then we're able to see it in them, and we're able to address the matter. I think that's pretty powerful in itself. Because if we can't see it in ourselves, it's inevitably going to show up in the workplace. It's inevitably going to show up in our homes, dealing with our children. And we dismiss it because we can't see it. Hey, Margaret, thank you for joining over on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining. Appreciate you. Yeah, Margaret says, so true, brother. Thank you. I appreciate that. We can absolutely dismiss things because we cannot see it. So know that this is one of the parts on how to stop the bleeding. We've got to be able to acknowledge our stuff. And when we can stop the bleeding, meaning when we can heal, we can see those same things in others. And this is why leadership is so important. Because we first have to experience ourselves. There's a scripture in the Bible that talks about a man having to try to remove a speck out of his brother's eye, and yet he's dealing with a plank of a larger object in his own eye. So we first have to remove the large object out of our own eye, regardless of how large it might be or how small or insignificant it may be. We first have to deal with the matter pertaining to us. Then that we may be able to see clearly and deal with our brother. And obviously, as we're dealing with our brother or our sister or that colleague or our wife, that significant other or subordinate, we're dealing with them out of compassion. We're dealing with them out of understanding because we too just had that issue or have dealt with that issue. However long ago it may have been, but this is where the compassion comes in because we too dealt with that particular matter. So transparency is absolutely going to be important. Transparency. that transparency. And here's the thing, and I want to just kind of say this really quick. I get it as a leader. You don't want to necessarily say certain things to your subordinates, and just because you didn't say certain things does not mean just because you didn't say a certain thing to your employee or your colleague or share with your spouse a certain way does not mean that you weren't being transparent. But at some point, you have to be able to learn how to say what you need to say in a creative manner, and you can still be transparent. You can still be vulnerable and say certain things and without having to, as what people say, keeping it real. And you're hurting people because you're saying, "Oh, I'm just being real. I'm just being honest." There's a way to divulge that information. There's a way to show up in a loving and respectful and a compassionate way to our partners, to our spouses, to our children. There's a way to say certain things. But then there's also a time to say, "Hey, enough is enough." That is the reality. And we have to, at some point, we have to be prepared to set up boundaries. Oftentimes, that's what's missing. We give people carte blanche to us, so to speak. Do what you want to do, say what you want to say, and we don't draw the line. And as men, we can feel disrespected. As a woman, obviously disrespected or unloved, and just, again, a host of different things for either man or woman that they may be dealing with. There has to be healthy boundaries that we're setting. And we're talking about stopping the bleeding. We're talking about things that we can do to stop the bleeding. We've got a comment here from Margaret over on LinkedIn. She says, "You're welcome, brother. I appreciate the way you are bringing the message for self. Everything begins with self. Excellent Bible interpretation paired with compassion. Truth, faith, walk." Yes, sister. Yes, sister. Thank you, Margaret. Absolutely appreciate you. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Margaret. Appreciate that. So again, dealing with our matters and being transparent, being vulnerable, saying, "Hey, this is what I'm dealing with," not from a passive aggressive manner. Say what you mean and mean what you say. And sometimes we have to sit with those things in order to figure out how to say them first to our spouse or the matter that we are presenting to someone else. We might have to sit with it for a moment and feel and come to a place on how we're going to construct that thing. And here, and this just dropped in my heart. Here's the thing too. You have to you have to be compassion first. You have to draw on the compassion that is in you in order to say it in a loving way. You have to be prepared to draw on that. And it might mean that you have to pause for a moment in order to draw on that compassion, because you too may have gone through the same thing. So we're still talking about being transparent, being vulnerable. Conflict resolution. This is essentially what we've been talking about. Stopping the bleeding. Being prepared to deal with the conflict. Being prepared to put your differences out there. Put them on the table. First for yourself, so that you can see. I do it often for myself. Because if I'm responding to my wife or responding to someone else in a certain manner that's not appropriate, at some point, especially if it's been done consistently, I have to be prepared to look at where it came from. We're talking about conflict resolution. I have to be prepared to resolve the conflict within my own self. And oftentimes we don't know how to resolve the conflict. Maybe resolving that conflict might mean pausing for a moment, just taking a deep breath before you respond. Because ideally, and I've been a witness to this before, our first response is typically, especially out of anger, our first response is not the best response. It's probably not going to be the best version of ourselves. So we might need to pause before we speak. Take a break, take a breather, step away for a moment. Let your spouse, let your significant other know that, hey, this is getting a little heated for me. And I don't want to say things that I should not say. We have to be able to be honest with ourselves and step away from certain things. I've been there too. I've had to step away. We're talking about conflict resolution. Meditation could be something that you could consider. Meditation is huge. Again, having that moment where you are doing some self-reflection. Meditation is a huge piece. Because at the end of the day, and sometimes when we are offended, or we feel offended by the other person, it may not necessarily be about what they've done to us, but rather what we're continuing to do to ourselves in the midst of the friction that may show up, the stories that we're telling ourselves that keep opening that wound, that internal wound or that internal bleeding that's taking place, that keep reintroducing certain things to us, certain thought perspectives into our psyche. Yes. We're still talking about conflict resolution, stopping the bleeding. As we wrap it up here, I'm going to talk about my last final, I've been on for a little bit, wow. My last final talking point here, we want to talk about building resilience. We want to talk about building resilience and how important that is. Because let's face it, unless a rubber band has been stretched, unless we as people have been tested, we're not going to know our capacity. We're not going to know our capacity. And capacity is huge in so many ways, on so many different levels. Capacity is huge. Capacity is what's missing in most cases for our human experience, capacity. Because in order to get capacity, you've got to be stretched. I'm not necessarily talking about the list of experiences that we have, and good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not necessarily talking about that. But the principles that we have now come to settle on, the foundation that we've come to build upon, because we've got the principle that's undergirding the story, the newfound story that we're telling ourselves. Not the same old stories, but the newfound story, the revelation. We've been exposed to something different now. And so we know that the principles are so important, and as is the resilience. It's so important that if you fall away from the principles, if you decide to ignore the principles and say the principles doesn't matter, you're stuck with your story. If you don't get the lesson from the story, you can't find your way out of the story. The principles in life are what undergird everything, every story. The principles in life are perhaps the lamp before our feet. The principles, the stories, not riddled with just a bunch of experiences, but we've extracted the principles. As I stated earlier, I shared with you the time that Jesus had come out of the wilderness after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. He was greeted by Satan, the first person that was trying to interrupt the plan. He was greeted by an adversary. He dealt with the discipline. These are the three things that each of us will deal with or choose not to deal with, because the discipline is the principle of the matter. Number 2, zeal. Having the right perspective, having the right information, unfounded truths, and being able to respond to those truths accordingly, unfounded and merited information, rather than having a zeal or being zealous for something that's unmerited or unfounded. And finally, number 3, the power and authority which Satan wanted to give to him. As men and women, humanity, this is in most cases, the ways that we fall. Every last one of us. The lack of discipline, the zeal, unfounded truths, and the power and authority affect all of us. The pride affect every last one of us. And when these 3 things are not in order, there is internal bleeding. There are internal wounds when we as leaders are undisciplined. Having known certain truths, but yet deciding to go the other way, deciding to look the other way, deciding to let that thing slide. And eventually it gets easier and easier to follow someone else's will. It gets easier and easier to be led by someone else rather than take the lead. Because at some point, when we keep giving it up, it's then taken from us. Wow. Hope this conversation has been all of that for you. It has been enlightening for you. I hope this conversation has been just an eye-opener for you. And I think that with the tools that I've shared with you, I think with the sort of roadmap I've kind of laid out and for you, that there's hope. that there's healing, and that there's, again, I think someone said here in the comments over on LinkedIn, uh, forgiveness and acceptance. We like to call it, or I like to call it accountability. And with these things in place, we can become the leaders that we are as men, as the women who are leading, just as people. Leadership is in the hands of all of us. But some of us, unfortunately, choose not to lead, or have a disdain towards leadership. And interesting enough, if you are choosing not to lead, you're being led. If you're choosing not to lead, leadership is divine. Leadership is divine. So I want to say thank you, Margaret. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you, Brother Wayne, my good brother and friend. Thank you, David Cause, over on LinkedIn. Thank you to my wife, Lenora, for engagement as well. Thank you, Sean Michael. And thank you all of those who will watch the replay. And thank you for those who are on Facebook. I don't see any names here or any comments on Facebook. Maybe there will be some later, but thank you. I'll check out each of the platforms. But again, thank you. This conversation has absolutely been a powerful discussion for me. And I've enjoyed it, and hope that you've enjoyed it, and that you will draw on the fruit from this conversation, and that in turn that you've come with an appetite, hungry for to stop the bleeding. Hungry to stop the bleeding, hungry to repair that internal wound, that internal bleeding that's taken place for you as a leader, regardless of your background, be it man or woman. Our goal is to give you the tools and present to you the information that's going to help you stop that bleeding. So that being said, I'm going to say good night, everyone. It has absolutely been wonderful. We will get the LinkedIn situation, or excuse me, the Zoom matter together really soon here. I just did not want to come on screen fumbling with it and trying to figure it out in the midst of a show or something like that, because I had not looked at it previously in order to set it up correctly. But I do want to put this on screen here, as I have shared with you a powerful discussion. We've been talking about leadership's bleeding, internal bleeding. It's been a great discussion. If you need more information on reaching out to me, you can contact me with the link on the screen. That's bit.ly/free coaching, free 30-minute coaching. It is a 30-minute strategy session. I have trouble saying that word there, but nevertheless, it is a free 30-minute strategy session. And we're going to, hopefully the goal is to work some things out, and you can kind of decide if you want to work with me or not, but that is the goal. So contact me, reach out to me with that link on screen. Blessing to all marriages. Thank you, Margaret. Absolutely. Thank you as well. Thank you. So check out that link on screen. Reach out to me for a 30-minute coaching session, and we can talk more. And also, I want to take it out on the screen. It's a perfect time to plug some of the things I've been doing here. Also, I've got a course that I just completed. Actually, it was a webinar that I did with a group of men, mastering the marriage mindset. And I had some questions, but I was able to remove some questions because they were personal in matter, and didn't make them part of the course. I just want to keep those things private, because there were men who were sharing certain personal and private matters. But with the information that's in this course here, it's going to give you the tools, more of the tools, to really bring your marriage to a full circle, guys. And it's going to change some things for you. It's going to give you a different perspective on your role as a man, and how you play and how you factor in your relationship as a man. Yeah, it's going to give you the tools to build a better marriage, better communication with your spouse. So check it out there at bit.ly/MTMM course there on the screen. So Again, as I stated moments ago, I'm going to say ciao for now. I've been on for a good hour and 15 minutes, guys, and we will see you next week with another discussion. I meet here each week at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and that is That Man Show. So we will talk with you later and say ciao for now. Bye bye.